thank you all for being here. A little background on me. I've been doing digital analytics for over 20 years now. I started out in web development, got into digital marketing pretty early on. I am one of the founders of Two Octobers, along with Chris Skavish, who is co-hosting. And I oversee analytics at our agency. Two Octobers is a purpose-driven digital agency. And we provide agency services. We also provide tools and training to agencies, and training and coaching, among other things, in analytics. And that includes Google Analytics, Data Studio, setting up data warehouses, data environments. I have a particular passion for Data Studio, so I'm going to be touching on it a little bit in this presentation. But the presentation as a whole is not going to rely on you being proficient in any given tool. This is going to be a bit more about concepts than practice, though at the end we will have what we call office hours, which will be a time to take some of what we've talked about and put it into practice. So, and if you're able to stick around and do that, that sometimes is, we get into things where attendees share problems, we do some problem solving, and that can be lead to some really interesting things. I am also a professor at the University of Denver, where I teach analytics and search engine marketing. And so getting back to the topic of this presentation, what I'm going to be going through, I guess workshop, not presentation, but I'm going to be going through how to find stories in data. I've led a couple of workshops around on topics related to presenting data and storytelling with data. And I've had people have asked me, okay, but before that, like, how do you actually find interesting things to talk about? And I don't know, I will, in the interest of full disclosure, this ended up being really hard for me. I have spent a lot of time providing insights with data, and I do think I'm good at it. People have described me as being able to pull rabbits out of hats, and that's so I do think I have some ability in it, but it's really hard to say like how I go about doing it. And so in preparation for this, I did spend a fair amount of time trying to understand my process and going through and doing analysis and recreating it, looking at other sources that I thought would be useful in helping to articulate it. But it's, it's a little bit like if you've had the pleasure of trying to teach your child how to drive a manual transmission, it's a little bit like that, because you have to sort of go back and be like, well, what do I do? Like, how do I teach this to somebody else when it is an almost entirely intuitive process? So I'm going to share some of what I found, which it turned out to be, I discovered some things about how I think and how I do things that were pretty revealing to me. So hopefully you'll find that helpful. So I'm going to describe my process, and then I'm going to go into what I call impressionistic exploration of data. I do want to talk a little bit about really being looking critically at the work that you're doing and how important that can be. And then, as I described, we're going to have office hours. This is being recorded, so and the link will be shared with you, including the slides and a recording of the presentation once we have a chance to edit it. I'm going to be keeping an eye on chat, so if you have questions along the way, please ask them in chat, and I will pay attention to that and work in answers where I can. In some cases, it might make sense to push an answer to the end. This is one of my favorite ideas. I had a professor in college who, I don't know, as we get through this presentation, in college I majored in mathematics and visual art, which you're going to probably find not too surprising by the time we get to the end. But one of my professors, weirdly, he was actually a math professor, but he was such a serious photographer. And I went to a small school, and he actually he taught photography there. And it actually, along the way, decided that he would rather teach photography than mathematics. I honestly didn't love him in either capacity, but he used to say this all the time, that when a student would come back and share, back then it was negatives and sort of here's what I did related to an assignment or something, like he would often bring up this idea that as a photographer, your job is not to take photographs, your job is to make photographs. That if you're just taking photographs, then it's the cameras doing the work, you're not doing the work. And so the idea is that you're really thinking through composition, lighting by time of day, where should you be to get the best photograph, what equipment should you be using, that it's really this I mean, there are many factors that go into creating the story that you're going to tell with a photograph. And that's that is definitely a theme here, is that what people often do, in my experience, is they have a tool, and maybe it's a fairly a tool that's built for general consumption, like Google Analytics, where you're just clicking around. It's like, okay, well, this report is interesting, I'm going to share this report. But the same is true if you're working in R or Python, that a lot of times people don't they don't make a story, they take it from what they perceive as the limitations of the tool. And a lot of what I like to do is overcome limitations of tools. So diving in, after really like a lot of reflection and work, this is what I came up with in my process. And we're going to talk through these, each of these steps one along the way. If you need a refresher on what a flowchart, sort of how a flowchart works, the red diamonds are decision points, and the squares are processes. So to start at the beginning, just to give an idea, the first thing I do before I'm investigate data is I make sure that I have the data that I need, which is usually a process of if most of the work that I've done is for businesses, and the goals that I'm looking for are things like revenue, leads, and do I actually have the revenue or lead data that I'm going to need to do my analysis? And hopefully the answer is yes. Often the answer is no. And then it's really a question of making sure that either am I looking in the right place? So for example, a client might share a view in Google Analytics that doesn't actually have historical revenue data or something like that. And I need to say, well, I can't actually do anything for you until you share some historical data, or it could be that e-commerce tracking is set up. So I'm not going to spend time on troubleshooting and talking about troubleshooting. That really is a different workshop. But there's no point in going down the path of looking for stories and data until you have the thread that you're looking for. So I mentioned that throughout this process, I'm really a duality of personalities, and I think this is really helpful as an analyst. That I'm part optimist and part skeptic, and the two sort of I guess sort of vie for control throughout the process. That the way that I do exploration is a fundamentally optimistic process, sort of hopeful, looking for things, and then my skeptic sort of chimes in and says, okay, yeah, now here's a reason why you're jumping to conclusions too quickly here. So we'll go through these in each of these these steps in varying amounts of detail. So I mentioned, like, the first thing is, do I have the data that I need? I'm not gonna spend time on steps to troubleshoot, but for sure, if you have curiosity in that area, that's something that we could cover during office hours. So I'm going to get into what I call impressionistic exploration, which is a somewhat guided process, but exploring data. You'll have some people take a fairly structured and deterministic approach to this and say, well, you need to have very specific questions. You need to have hypothesis. You're doing hypothesis testing. It is possible that there are people that do data analysis that way, but frankly, most people that would recommend that you are that specific at the beginning are not being completely honest with themselves or with you, that they are doing more exploration than they're letting on. And by that, I mean somewhat unguided exploration, because really the nature of exploration is that you're not entirely sure where your next step is going to take you. That said, there is always something, like, there is a what, and I'm going to go through an example of a what, which was really about looking for ways to increase conversions for a client. When I start exploration, there is a where, and these are the primary wheres that I tend to think about. So audiences would be characteristics of the type of people, and I am looking at website data. So you know, hopefully most of you here are interested in the process of exploring web analytics data and marketing analytics data. There are certainly sort of in the world of things, there's data that relates to everything. This is what we're going to be talking about. So audiences is characteristics of the people that I am reaching or trying to reach. Channels is marketing channels, and so that could be social media versus search. Content is content that I have out there on my website, on other channels, social media, YouTube. And then user experience is the experience I'm creating for users. And those are, I will tend to take my what, in this case, how do I generate more leads or conversions for a client? And I'm going to start with a process of where. a metaphor that I want to use for this, this has really stuck with me. I read this interesting little book, and the picture of me is pretty small, but I did bring it because it's a fascinating little book. So the book is Trout Foods and Their Imitations, and it's published by Orvis, which makes fly fishing equipment. And it's just a lovely little book. It's very poetic, like you think about it, like trout foods and their imitations. It seems like it's going to be pretty technical, and it is, but it's sort of like technical written by a poet. And the one of the things that the author talks about in the book is the idea that a trout develops a search image for food. And what that means is that trouts have pretty small brains, and the main thing they do for most of their lives is eat. Certainly, occasionally they procreate, and that's pretty important too. But a lot of what a trout is a machine that's optimized for eating efficiently. And so part of that process is developing the search image of what constitutes food. And what's fascinating is that at a given point in time, that search image is based on what is food for that trout at that time. So in a given stream or river or lake, the insects that are hatching are food, and everything else is garbage. So you could drop like whatever the trout equivalent of chicken cordon bleu or whatever your food passion is in front of that trout, and it would be like, not interested, because mayflies are what's hatching right now. So mayfly nymphs are food, everything else is garbage. So this is sort of going back to this idea that I'm going to go into the sort of chaotic process of exploration, but developing your search image. Like, this is what I'm after, because otherwise you go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, and you discover that you aren't actually answering your question. Once I've developed my search image, I've figured out what my what and where I'm looking, then I go into what in this process of self-reflection, I sort of best categorized as impressionistic exploration. And this is going through the data, and I do a lot of trial and error, and I'm going to spend a bit of time on this because I think this is probably the most valuable part of everything that I'm going to talk about from a procedural standpoint. But again, what we're here to talk about today is finding stories and data, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about telling stories with data. That is a separate topic. And so finding this process of exploration and how we go about exploration it really is the essence of it. So themes that you're going to see as I go through some of like a real example, I go through a lot of sort of going here, looking, going there, looking, trying this, looking, trying that, looking, and being sort of failing fast, failing forward, like learning as I make mistakes, trying to figure out, okay, what can I do differently? And then the other thing is that, and you'll see this, the example here is a real example. It is something, as I was going through, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do some exploration. And I went through this process, and the story that I found is not the story that I was looking for. And that is, in my experience, it is nearly always true. So if we go back to the flow chart, we're going to do this impressionistic exploration. We will return back and sometimes return back to the very beginning and define a new question. So I tend to be not very focused as I'm doing exploration. problem with focus is it's hard to let go of what it is that you're looking for. So like the trout, I do have something an outcome that I want, but if I'm just like too fixated on I'm going to find it here, then as often as not, well, more often than not, I'm going to fail. And actually, this is something. So I teach analytics a lot. I've been teaching it in organizations for a really long time. I've been teaching it in university for about 5 years. And where I find that people get stuck often is that they're like, this is where I'm going to find my answer. And you really need to not focus on one point in the landscape, but really take in the landscape as a whole. So let's dig into an actual example. The question that I was curious about answering is, how will improvements in page load time impact conversion metrics for a client? And the sort of optimizing page load time is something that we as an agency have been focusing on a lot recently, as it's become sort of considered to be a more important factor in organic search ranking. It's sort of certainly gained importance for us, but also just as a user experience metric. There's a lot of evidence that people are less likely to stick around, less likely to convert, and fairly dramatically less likely as page load time increases. So what I wanted to do is get some metrics around this to be able to try to sort of quantify the value. And there's some third-party data on this, but I wanted to do it for a particular client. And again, I would love to go back into the steps that I took. I decided not to do this live, go through what I went through live, because I would say end to end, this was probably about a 4-hour process of exploration. And I didn't feel like I could do it justice if I actually tried to go through each report. But I'm going to show you some things along the way that I think you'll find really interesting, and definitely note them down, be prepared during office hours to say, hey, can we go back to how you did that particular thing? So for my investigation, I'm interested in knowing how page load time affects conversion rate. And so for this client, the first thing that I was curious about is just how much variance is there? Like, will I be able to look at pages on their website and say, okay, well, these ones are fast, these ones are slow, these ones are in between. So I came to, in Google Analytics, the behavior, site speed, it's the page timings report, to look for how page load times varied. And it looked like there was a pretty good range. I explored down a variety of pages. One thing that is really difficult to do in Google Analytics, so that was in Google Analytics, is that report, it's really hard to, it's limited the number of metrics that it shows you. So I wanted to also know, well, how many people are visiting these pages? Because what I wanted to do is do an investigation of fast pages, slow pages, and in between pages, and see how the conversion rate varied. And there was no point in doing that if the page only had a few visitors. So I wanted to also look at pages that had a decent amount of traffic and for which I had page load time data. So I created a custom report with the dimension of landing page and then metrics for sessions and page load time. Then I did something tricky, which is I exported that data. And so what I wanted to do is build segments in Google Analytics for fast pages, slow pages, medium pages. And if you're at all familiar with how to build segments in Google Analytics, you have generally what you're doing is you're saying, well, I want a segment where this dimension equals this. But one of the things that you can do, and this is one of my favorite features of Google products in general, but Google Analytics and Data Studio of most note right here, is that you can always use what are called regular expressions to match pages or other dimensions. In this case, it's pages is what I want to match. So what I did is I exported all of the page load time data, and then I ordered it by the page load time. And then I created, using a formula in Google Sheets, I created a regular expression to match all of the pages. In this case, I think this formula is actually in the wrong row, but I believe what I did is I matched all pages that were faster than 3.5 seconds. And then I matched all the pages that were faster than 5.5 seconds, and then anything that was slower than 5.5 seconds. So faster than 3.5 seconds being the fastest pages, 5.5 being, and actually you can see as I go, I took that regular expression and I created a custom segment in Google Analytics. And what you can see is that I'm saying the landing pages matches this regular expression, and essentially this is a list. It has to follow a specific format. And I will share later a video I did on regular expressions if that's of interest to you. I would recommend that you at least get rudimentary regular expressions in your toolkit because they really extend the power of Google Analytics and Google Data Studio massively. So I created this segment for 3.5 seconds or faster. Part of why I did the divisions where I did was just because it divided the pages up fairly equally. So I wanted to have approximately similar numbers of pages that I was looking at from a volume standpoint. So there isn't anything magical about the speeds that I ended up faster than 3.5 seconds, faster than, greater than 3.5 seconds, less than 5.5 seconds, and then greater than 5.5 seconds are the segments that I created. So then applying those segments in Google Analytics, I came back and I was like, well, okay, this doesn't help me at all. So if you notice, like what this tells me is that from a goal conversion rate standpoint, the best goal conversion rate actually occurs in the middle segment, the page loads that are faster than 3.5 seconds and less than 5.5 seconds. Yes, this is basic Google Analytics. Answering a question in chat. So, I mean, there is no way to interpret this as being meaningful because what I would expect is that the faster pages would tend to have higher conversion rates. I could accept an answer that slower pages have higher conversion rates. That could make some sense. But the idea that I've got sort of slow, medium, and fast, and the highest conversion rate is medium doesn't make any sense at all. That there is no correlation there whatsoever. And so what that caused me to do is to say, well, okay, so maybe you're not, maybe you started on a flawed assumption. And so going back to my process, I'd defined my question, I'd done some exploration. I did actually answer the question of, is there a relationship between page load speed and conversion rate? And the answer for this client was no, that there is not, which is not useful. It doesn't mean that there is, under any circumstance, not a relationship. What it means is that in this particular case, what I suspected is that there are other variables that carry more weight than page load speed. So then I asked a different question, which is, how do landing page topics impact conversion rates? Because as I looked through the landing page data, I saw that there were fairly significant variations in the types of landing pages. Like, they get traffic to a wide variety of pages, and they have a lot of content. So this website provides information to help people live well with Parkinson's, and they have literally thousands of blog posts and resources related to living well with Parkinson's across a variety of topics. So then I was just interested in, okay, well, let me look at how landing page topics impact conversion metrics, because maybe that's drowning out any factors related to page speed. And certainly you might be sitting there thinking, well, there are other ways that you could have approached the page speed problem, but keeping in mind that I'm still in this sort of this place of not like, I'm doing impressionistic exploration. I'm not too fixated on a particular outcome. I am exploring, looking for stories. It is helpful to start out with that question, or in Trout terms, search image, but I'm willing to let it go if it doesn't take me where I'm looking for. So the next thing was, how do topics affect conversion rate? I was hoping that I would go and look at content groupings that were set up in Google Analytics and find that somebody had defined content groupings, possibly me, that previously that I could use for analysis, which would have been great. And the steps I'm going to walk through were steps that I took in Data Studio, but you could take them here by defining content groupings. You could do something very similar in Google Analytics. So in any case, I got to here and I was like, okay, well, that's a dead end. So then I went into Data Studio and I did something very similar to what I was doing in Google Analytics with segments. But here what I did is I created a dimension in Data Studio, which is doing something very similar to what I was doing with segments, which is using regular expressions to match a variety of conditions and saying, okay, well, if I find this in the page title, then classify it as about Parkinson's. If I find this in the page title, then classify the page as on the topic of exercise and nutrition. So I come up with these topics, and I, in Data Studio terms, created them as a custom field. Essentially what I'm trying to do is come up with a layer of description about a topic. And there are a lot of different paths you could take to get there. You could do it with custom segments in Google Analytics. You could do it with content groupings in Google Analytics. In this case, I chose to do it with a custom field in Google Data Studio. So I did this, and it didn't work at all. And I thought the reason it didn't work is that I was trying to use page title as a dimension, and one of the things that's fussy when you're working with Google Analytics data in Data Studio is that not every dimension works with every metric. So you have the access to all of the possible dimensions in Google Analytics, but the scoping of those dimensions can be at what's called the hit level, the session level, or the user level. And so if I try to apply a hit level dimension to session level metrics, for example, then I'm gonna run into problems. And that's what I thought happened. We'll get. So iterating back, like I'm going back and I'm like, okay, well, let's try a different approach. So this time what I tried to do is classify landing pages, because the landing pages are session scoped, whereas page titles are hit scoped, and as dimensions. And so I thought, okay, well, that's got to be my problem. And I won't go through the specifics, but I did a lot of classifying of pages to look for if in the URL of the page matches this, then classify it as this, and so on. And then, oh no, it happened again. So I was like, all right, there is something I'm missing here. And this is something that I do a fair amount. I was like, okay, well, let's go back. Let's rewind to something that works, and then work your way forward and see if you can find out what's going wrong. So I stripped out, this is back to the definition of my custom field in Data Studio. And so in Data Studio, you can add fields to data. And in this case, I'm doing it using a case statement to, again, classify landing pages. And so you can see here something relatively straightforward. If the landing page equals / then return home page. When the landing page matches this pattern, then return events. And so I just rewound and said, okay, well, I'm going to take this monster statement of saying all of these, if this, then do this, if this, then do this, and I'm going to see if I can find out what's going wrong. And what I discovered is that I had in one of my lines, I had a broken regular expression. I had 2 asterisks next to each other, which what asterisks mean is 0 or more of the previous thing. And if you have 2 asterisks in a row, apparently in Data Studio, it still validates as proper regular expression, but it breaks your chart. So the chart doesn't work, even though it doesn't give you an error that you've entered an invalid regular expression. With that, then I was like, okay. So I added the landing page topic. I added a couple of columns to a chart in Data Studio. And on the right, you can see conversion rate. And you start to see some pretty dramatic variation. So I did all this classification, and you can see the total sessions, and then classified by topics. And then you can see the conversion rates over on the right-hand side. And we're getting to really meaningful data here. So like, just like, I don't know, I don't think it comes naturally to look at a range of conversion rates and really appreciate what they mean. But so let's just step back and think about this for a second. If we look at like a couple of topics, motor symptoms, non-motor symptoms, those are of Parkinson's, the conversion rate is 2.9%, 3%. If we go up to exercise and nutrition, it's more than twice that. So content related to exercise and nutrition is more than twice as likely at 6.6% to convert to in this case, it's either a download or some form of explicit engagement where the user has asked for a resource or ordered something. So now I was on to something. Looking at the process, have I answered my question? Yes. Is it useful? Well, yes, it is, which takes me. This is where along the way, my focus, I do start to focus in. And this is the point at which I'm like, okay, these are the things, or this is the thing that I'm going to zero in on, which then takes me to the last step in the process, which is to explain it visually. And so Richard Feynman was a physicist. He's a little notorious for having been part of the Manhattan Project and made some pretty significant breakthroughs that led to the atomic bomb. he later became a pacifist and was not sort of changed his point of view on some of the work that he had done. But he was a brilliant physicist, particularly worked in quantum theory. But one of the things that he's most known for is that he was an incredible teacher, and sort of in the world of science, he's considered to be one of the great teachers of the 20th century. And he developed this method, teaching and learning go hand in hand, of what we call the Feynman method. And this is to do with how to learn something. And what he said, the fastest way to learn something is to explain it, and to explain it to somebody who's not an expert, a child, a student, somebody who doesn't have a background in the subject that you're explaining. And as you explain it, identify gaps in what it is that you're explaining. Like, is it coming across? Are they understanding what you're communicating? And if they're not, this is something that I think is really interesting and insightful about Feynman's point of view. Is his point of view was, if they're not getting it, it's not on them, it's on you. It's that you don't understand it well enough to explain it in terms that somebody else can understand it. And I think that's a beautiful idea. So, like, I think I don't know, there's deep aphorism, there are no stupid questions, but I think somewhere inside of us, we are always sort of tending to think, oh, well, this person's just not getting it, they don't have the aptitude, that it's really not likely about that. What it's likely about is that you don't understand what you're trying to explain well enough to be able to explain it well to somebody else. I love this idea. So in his case, he would say, go back to the literature. He was a research scientist. In our case, we go back to the data. So the process of articulating your narrative is to put it together in a way that you would use to communicate to somebody else, and does it explain the point that you're trying to make? So in my case, I took the data that I'd pulled together for conversion rate, and I started working on presenting it. Again, today our focus is on finding stories in data, not telling stories with data. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on how to present it, but going through this idea. So, remember I said, like, I don't think we intuitively are good at looking at small percentages and appreciating that, when I say it out loud, you're going to be like, well, that's kind of obvious, but like that 6.5% conversion rate is more than twice 3.1% conversion rate, and so on. And the date range we're looking at here is a little different than what we were looking at before, so the metrics have changed a little bit. So if I can visualize it with, okay, now you can see like what this means, and I might go steps further to, like, I think a great way to explain it would be to say, if you have 1,000 visitors with 6.5% conversion rate, you're going to get 65 customers or downloads or whatever it is that you're looking. Whereas with a 3%, you're going to get 30. So that's something that anybody can understand, like 30 versus 65. Again, trying to get back to, can you appreciate that, have I explained it in a way that anybody could understand? So I said at the beginning, I'm going to spend a few minutes going into my inner skeptic, and mine, is fairly pushy. So things that I want to look for are, do I have enough data? And if we go back here, the numbers that we're looking at are 996 is or I guess we have 273 here. Maybe that's getting on the low end in terms of like when we look at a conversion rate of 5.1% out of 273, that might be a little thin on data, but most of these are in the thousands, and that's plenty of data to say that this is a meaningful distinction. Versus if we were looking at this and we saw that we were trying to base our conclusions on 50 sessions or 100, even 100 sessions, then those variances are a lot less meaningful, just because of the randomness involved in somebody, like whether or not somebody converts, right? Like if you just think about like, if your conversion rate is 5%, that doesn't mean that every 100 visits you should expect 5 conversions, because of the randomness and how conversions are distributed. It's really going to be all over the place. So do I have enough data? Can I trust the data? This goes back to, is it reliable? If I find something that's really unusual, then one of the things that I want to do is just make sure, is this based on the right conclusions? And one of the things that I will tell you is that in my initial analysis, that Google Analytics does pull page load speed data, but it only does it periodically. And so maybe it's not enough. Maybe it's not a reliable source. It's not nearly as authoritative as what you would get from the Google Lighthouse plugin in Chrome, or the Lighthouse-based data in Google PageSpeed Insights. So if I want to know page load time, so I would generally take those page load times in Google Analytics with a bit of a grain of salt. Andrew, did you miss the correlation to page speed? That's where I started. So I went down a path of looking for correlation to page speed, and I actually didn't. What I found is there was no correlation to page speed. This one's really important. Do I know enough about what I'm looking at? So this is something where I find this with my students all the time, is that they'll jump into things about drawing conclusions based on new users in Google Analytics, which is a very elusive metric. It's what new users in Google Analytics means, is really just, did this Google Analytics view see this cookie from this user on this device previously? It doesn't mean people at all. And then even if it does, new users is, if we're marketers, a high new users number could be the thing that we're looking for. We're trying to drive new people to a website. If we're trying to improve engagement on a website, then maybe we want to see that number go down. So it's a very nuanced number. And so if I don't really understand the various meanings of new users and implications, then really I shouldn't be talking about it. And this is a peeve of mine in the world of data science. Like, data science is like the hottest profession and field of study right now. But if you don't actually understand where the underlying data comes from and what it means, then you're going to suck as a data scientist. And I've seen this over and over and over again. This one, I think, so this is a different way of saying confirmation bias, is like, am I sort of, am I trying to force the data to tell me the story that I want? Or am I noticing something that excites me? And this, and fixating on that. And this is a principle that one of my favorite books is Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And one of the principles that he elucidates in Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow is the idea that if something stands out, we tend to fixate on it and give it way more attention than we should. So, let's just say that you are you're operating your lemonade stand, and somebody you have a customer that shows up that day dressed in a gorilla suit. Well, that is going to be all you think about and all you talk about for a while yet to come. And you're going to have a really hard time forgetting the person dressed in a gorilla suit and realizing that, people in general were not interested in buying your lemonade because it was too sour or something like that. So we tend to focus on the wrong things because we're really interested in those unexpected results, and we tend to fixate on them too much. Daniel Kahneman, being Daniel Kahneman, describes it as a useful capability because he's always trying to work things back to why are we this way in the first place? And he actually has a fairly optimistic view of humanity, which sort of I could summarize as saying that we tend to be bad at statistics because we're good at surviving. And if you were good at statistics, you'd be bad at surviving because you would not necessarily take the chances that you should be taking. That's a way oversimplified way of describing it, but so winding back, and I would love it if you share some of your own experiences, because like I said, for me, this was there was a lot of discovery in this, and I actually found this really hard for me to do, to figure out how I go about it. So the thing, emphasizing again, in impressionistic exploration, there is a lot of trial and error. You want to start a guided process, understanding what it is you're trying to understand and where you're going to look, and then be sort of loosen up and try a lot of things and be comfortable going down dead ends a lot, but don't get stuck in those dead ends. And then the process of explaining it visually, and that sort of beautiful idea of Richard Feynman's, that by explaining things to other people is how we can gauge our understanding, and more importantly, be able to identify where our understanding is lacking. And I think, I don't know, like learning about his method, like actually for me, helped me so many things fall into place. Like just when you think about for yourself, if you want to understand something, the best thing to do is to think about how you would explain it to somebody else. Couple of questions here. We'll tackle those in a second. So this is another peeve of mine, which is that like the data that we're looking at is digital analytics data, which means that it's describing things about people, traffic, sources of traffic, website pages, mobile experience. These are all things that are available on the same screen that we're looking at to do our analysis. And too often what we do is we take those numbers and we make them look pretty, and then we present them to somebody without actually going the extra step of understanding more about what we're looking at by visiting the website or the source of traffic, or pulling it up on our mobile device, etc. And I think again, that gets more into how to tell the story in an effective way, but it is something that is very much part of my process. As I go from that, creating the narrative, as I get into creating the narrative, I'm going to go and search other sources. If I'm talking about like topics and conversion rates, do some research, see what other people have to say on that subject, if there are other data sources